And we put the organization, our problem was, as I foresaw it, and it worked, somebody from Coldwater wanted to go to the John. There may be a vote coming up. You got to stay here. Wet your pants. You got to stay here, really. And everything, we had U.S. senators and we had governors and all were floor leaders.
Yeah.
And they all had to keep, and we each had 6 states. I had 6 states. I don't remember which they were. And we had to keep everybody in their seat in case we had a vote coming up. And we did.
What about the decision to let Reagan give a speech at the end? And he gave a speech which was well received. What was the feeling going out of the convention, you think? I mean, did people feel pretty good? Did you feel that the party was unified? Had Reagan been conciliatory enough in defeat or not, or what? Or did you feel you had a divided party to a certain extent?
I must have felt okay because I didn't, even the Jack Wellborns, who was the Reagan chairman of Michigan, he came away saying, let's go home and work for Ford.
Well, it sure beats losing. Yes. Right? Yes. Anyway, and you did a heck of a job to pull it off.
The one thing a state chairman wants to get one thing out of a convention. He wants your troops to have a good time. He wants your troops to go home happy because they're the ones that are going to have to win the election. And so I felt that with Wellborn's support, we were ready to go.
Did Jerry Ford himself play any kind of direct role that you can remember in the nomination process at the convention?
The president called me after our delegation was chosen and before we went to Kansas City. My secretary, I think it was Libby Otis, came in and said, the president's on the phone. Oh, jeez. Well, I went and got the phone call, and it was Ford. He wanted me to please make sure, because we had split up, there was going to be so many Ford delegates, so many Reagan delegates. Let's get our people into the Reagan thing, so we got them on the platform and stuff like that. I said, Mr. President, I can't do that. As I've told your staff, we wrote these rules to protect Reagan's people from doing it to you. And so we don't control them. Well, you could tell he was mad. And he hung up. Bill, I had gone through their staff, their attorneys and everything else, telling them, we can't do it because we've written the rules to protect you.
Right.
We could see Reagan coming, and we didn't want him to. And so I can't name a Ford delegate from Battle Creek if they're not for Reagan. They would go to vote for Reagan. He wanted on the platform. I said I can't do that. So he was pretty upset at that. Although not that upset. 43 years or whatever ago today, I met him at University of Notre Dame on St. Patrick's Day and called all the Michigan and Southwest Michigan chairmen. He was making a speech. All the Southwest Michigan, West and Southwest Michigan county chairmen came down there and he talked to them. And another memorable thing I had in the general campaign or before the convention was pulling together probably a dozen or more of my friends from around the country, state chairman, national committee people, to the White House for him to talk to them about their support. And this was almost as indelible as Bill Milliken on Mackinac Island. I'm sitting in we must have been what's called the Red Room, because all I remember is all the windows were red. And there was a long window I could see, and he was silhouetted against the long window. And in the distance was the Washington Monument. It was sunset. It was a beautiful day, and I looked and saw Jerry Ford is the President of the United States. Wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Wow.
It is amazing.
Yes, it is.
What about the choice of Bob Dole?
Amazing. When the convention was over, there was an old tradition from times before telegraph or wires or anything else that the convention convention pulls together a committee to go to the nominee to announce to the nominee that they've received the nomination. I'm sure in Lincoln's time it was great, and it took 5 or 6 days for somebody to go from Chicago to Springfield or something, or wherever he was, to tell him. But I'm sure Ford watched every second on top. But anyways, I was named to the committee to announce to the vice president. So we went from the convention floor back to the Crown Plaza, which was to his suite, I was still wearing my red cap from the floor, my
Right.
white jacket. First thing I walked in the door, I said, "Mr. President, would you mind?" And so he autographed my peak and my red cap, which I treasure to this day. Until about 3:30 a.m., we talked about vice presidential people. Teeter was there. Bob Teeter, who was the pollster, was
Right.
there, and you know, we talked the pros and cons of everything. I don't remember Bob Dole's name ever being announced. We talked about Richardson. We talked about Ruckelshaus.
Ruckelshaus, yeah.
And I think when I left, I thought Ruckelshaus was probably the leader. Went home, got up the next morning, and he had announced it was Bob Dole. I love Bob Dole. Bob Dole was chairman on my watch. He's a great guy. I think he's a wit.
Yeah.
But
Wow, how do you think he came to be? Did you ever hear any stories how he came to be picked?
I think the thing is that he went to bed, woke up, and said it's got to be Dole, and just I don't.
Just a gut thing.
Teeter never knew it. Teeter didn't know. Now,
Yeah.
so I think it was just the gut. He said it's going to be Bob Dole, and it was great because the year before, when he was still in Congress, before he was vice president, he had Bob Dole for a fundraiser in Ionia County, and I have a great picture before the buffet table at somebody's house in Ionia County of Bob Dole and Jerry Ford, neither one of whom knew what was going to come in 2 or 3 years.
Okay, let's go. I mean, if there's anything more you want to say about Carter versus Ford that fall in the election, the general election, as you know, Ford carried Michigan, but he lost narrowly nationally, about 51 to 48%. And Carter was elected. Do you have any other feelings
he
about that?
probably lost because of the gaffe on one of the debates where he said Eastern Europe wasn't under the thumb.
Freed Poland.
Freed Poland, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was almost as bad, probably, as George Romney on Lou Gordon's show in 1967 say he was brainwashed in
Vietnam.
In Vietnam, he probably was brainwashed. He was given bad information. Ford just made a gaffe.
Yeah.
And instead of the staff making him the next day say, "Whoops, I misspoke myself," he never did and carried that burden to the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, the election is over. Carter is president. Democrats control both the House and Senate here in Michigan.
Right.
They actually have a majority of the congressional delegation because of those terrible special election losses that we discussed back in 1974.
Plus Cedarburg and
Well, Cedarburg was still there. He didn't lose until 78.
Oh, okay.
We're talking after 76.
Okay.
It's early 77. You have been chairman for 4 terms.
Yes, sir.
And at one point, when Nelson Rockefeller, whom we have not discussed, had been selected by Ford to be his vice president and then couldn't get confirmed, you, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, were rumored to be in line to maybe join the Rockefeller team down in Washington or whatever, if Rockefeller had been confirmed. But then he wasn't, so Ford had no vice president until, you know, well, he never had one because he served out his term. And Carter
that was
took
the
over.
other thing that I'm sure that Rockefeller, I believe that Rockefeller would have won the election for Ford had he stayed on the ticket.
There you go.
But it was the Bo Callaways of the world that got him off, and finally he
Right.
said, "The heck with it, I don't need this stuff," and
Right.
got off.
So he got off.
I
the ticket.
honestly believe a Ford Rockefeller ticket would have won away with
Would
an
have
election.
won. Yeah. So he was vice president, appointed just the way Ford had been, but he got off a ticket because there was so much blowback from the right wing.
Right, right.
So, okay. So Rockefeller is out, Ford is out, everybody's out, but you're running for a 5th term
Yes, sir.
to set the record as long as serving chairman. Right. What happens? You get opposition. And why?
I got opposition from a young, so I guess he was young, state legislator from Flint, Bob Edwards, who was backed by another legislator, John Engler, and another guy by the name of Spencer Abraham, who would go on to be the Secretary of Energy eventually in Reagan's anything. How do you ever know why? I think I want the power. I mean, I started first thinking about running against Art Elliott many years before because I thought I could do a better job. The problem with these 3 people were they were looking for power, and they had a great campaign issue. These were sharp people who know all about computers. They wanted me to do this elaborate computer thing. We didn't have any money to do computers in the park. I was running with a broken adding machine.